The relationship between France and Jehovah's Witnesses has been uneasy at best, combative at worst. And this has been going on for decades. The French Republic, famously secular and fiercely protective of its principle of the separation of church and state, has often viewed religious movements with suspicion, especially those deemed sectarian or cult-like. On the other hand, Jehovah's Witnesses have portrayed themselves as victims of religious intolerance, fighting for freedom of conscience against oppressive governments. Now, that uneasy dance has reached a boiling point once again. Reports have emerged that French authorities, through a prefecture, have formally notified two national Jehovah's Witness associations of their intention to withdraw their legal recognition as religious organizations. And to understand why France has taken this stand, we must first revisit the country's long and turbulent relationship with religious organizations and why Jehovah's Witnesses have found themselves in the crosshairs of a state determined to curb sectarian influence. France is not new to confronting religious movements that undermine personal freedom. The strict principle of separation of church and state is woven into the national fabric, born from centuries of religious conflict, particularly between the Catholic Church and secular governments. That principle ensures that religion remains a private matter, not a political or social authority. In the 1990s, the French government took a bold step in response to rising public concern over cultic movements. The Parliamentary Commission on Cults in 1995 published a report listing 173 organizations it considered potentially dangerous sects. Among them, Jehovah's Witnesses. And the report cited the group's well-documented authoritarian structure, social isolation policies, notably the shunning of former members, and its hostility to secular institutions. In particular, the government was concerned about the psychological pressure exerted on adherents, their refusal of certain medical treatments, notably the blood transfusions, and the economic exploitation of members through heavy donation demands. And although France did not outright ban the religion, it subjected the organization to intense fiscal scrutiny. In 1998, French authorities hit the watchtower with a massive 60% tax on all donations collected between 1993 and 1996, arguing that their activities were more commercial than religious. And after years of legal wrangling, the European Court of Human Rights sided with Jehovah's Witnesses in 2011, ruling that France's tax action violated religious freedom.
After a 14-year legal battle, the government of France repaid to Jehovah's Witnesses more than $8 million. Here with us to discuss this development is Mr. Jean-Claude Ponce, who is a member of the national headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses in France. So, Mr. Ponce, could you briefly explain what happened?
Good afternoon, sir. The French government just returned to us 6 million euros, or little more than $8 million. This money was unjustly collected from us, and the reimbursement included interest and legal fees.
But why did the government claim this money?
In 1998, the government claims that all the donations received by Jehovah's Witnesses between 1993 and 1996 be subjected to a 60% retroactive tax. Thus, the government claimed from Jehovah's Witnesses the payment of a huge amount of 45 million euros. No religious organization in France had ever faced such a crushing tax.
So how did Jehovah's Witnesses react?
We tried to find a solution with the tax official, but the government insisted that we pay the amount, the tax. Then we have to litigate this matter before various jurisdictions in France. At the end, we lost our case, and the only choice we had was to bring this matter before the European Court of Human Rights.
So what happened at the European Court?
The court found that by imposing such a tax, France was guilty of violating the freedom of religion of Jehovah's Witnesses. The court thus ordered France to remove all the consequences of the tax. This includes returning the funds, paying interest and legal fees. It is interesting to note that France was a founding member of the Council of Europe, and by the fact it is the first time that France is condemned for violating the freedom of religion.
Then how did the French government react?
What is surprising, at first, the French government ignored the decision and it continued to demand the payment of the tax. So a second judgment from the court was necessary. The judgment tells the government that the tax was illegal and could not be imposed to Jehovah's Witnesses.
But even with that victory, distrust never disappeared. France's interministerial mission for monitoring and combating cultic deviances continued to monitor the organization, flagging it in annual reports for sectarian drifts, especially at handling of CSA allegations, coercive control of members, and manipulation of family relationships. When the French authorities initiated their review of Jehovah's Witnesses' legal status, the organization's global headquarters in Warwick, New York, responded in its characteristic fashion, not with transparency, humility, or dialogue, but with propaganda and manipulation. A leaked letter circulated among local congregations across France urged Jehovah's Witnesses to write to various French ministries, government officials, and the media defending their organization. Now, this might appear like a grassroots campaign, but the document's tone and content reveal it was anything but spontaneous. The letter instructs witnesses on what to write, how to write, and who may write. It prescribes precise phrases designed to evoke sympathy, minimize controversy, and frame Jehovah's Witnesses as harmless victims of persecution. And among its most revealing aspects were these instructions. As you can see here, it says only baptized members in good standing were to write letters, excluding inactive members, disfellowshipped individuals, or anyone who might deviate from the official narrative. Also, no original thoughts were encouraged. Now, what emerges from this is not a picture of a faith community defending itself freely, but of a centralized cult mobilizing its followers in a synchronized PR operation. Every line of the letter reeks of institutional fear of losing the legal privileges that grant them tax exemption, freedom from scrutiny, and the facade of legitimacy. And Jehovah's Witnesses often present themselves as these innocent victims of persecution, invoking biblical prophecy that God's servants would be hated by all nations. And this narrative has been used for decades to rally followers and deflect criticism. The French deregistration case offered a perfect opportunity to weaponize that persecution complex. But make no mistake, this is not democracy in action yet. It is theocratic control in motion. When individuals are told what to write, when to write it, and under whose supervision, they are not expressing faith. They are executing orders. The campaign also exposes how Watchtower's hierarchy depends on orchestrated public image management, rather than address the reasons for France's concerns, such as the organization's cover-ups of CSA, coercive social structures. It redirected its followers' energy toward emotional persuasion. It's a cynical move. Rather than reform, they perform. Contrary to Watchtower's cries of persecution, France's actions are not an attack on faith. The government does not ban worship, seize property, or imprison members. Instead, it is examining whether the organization's legal registration as a religious association aligns with French law and values of individual freedom and secularism. France has repeatedly emphasized that religious liberty must not become a shield for psychological manipulation or institutional abuse. When a group dictates who members can associate with, how they can think, whether they can receive life-saving medical care, it steps beyond spiritual guidance and into coercive control. And in this sense, deregistration is not a punitive measure. It is a protective one. It aims to strip the organization of privileges it has abused while still allowing individual members the freedom to believe as they wish. At the core of this controversy lies a truth that ex-members have long recognized. Jehovah's Witnesses are not encouraged to think critically or independently. The leaked letter is just one of those countless examples proving that obedience is valued above conscience. In Watchtower culture, unity is paramount, even when that unity demands silence or deception. The governing body in New York, viewed as the mouthpiece of God, expects absolute compliance from its global followers. And this pattern extends seamlessly into the French letter writing campaign. By dictating how followers should express themselves to the government, the organization reaffirmed the central dogma that no witness may speak for themselves, only for the organization. The irony is profound. A group that claims to defend religious freedom is internally structured as a totalitarian regime. Every act of support is prescripted, every voice harmonized into a chorus of conformity. Why is the Watchtower so desperate to maintain its registration in France? The answer, as always, lies in money and power. Legal recognition grants Jehovah's Witnesses access to tax exemptions, donation protections, and public credibility. It allows them to purchase land, build kingdom halls, and conduct large-scale preaching operations without being classified as a commercial or political entity. If France deregisters the organization, it would lose these privileges. Donations might become taxable. Properties might face greater scrutiny, and future legal battles could expose internal corruption. But beyond the financial concerns, there's a deeper fear here: precedent. If France, a prominent Western democracy, formally declares that Jehovah's Witnesses no longer meet the standards of a legitimate religion, other nations may follow suit. The Watchtower's global reputation, already tarnished by lawsuits and media exposés, could crumble further. And this is why the organization's reaction has been so extreme. It is not merely fighting for its French operations, it is fighting for its survival as a brand. Former witnesses have spoken about the psychological damage of shunning, the trauma of being cut off from family members, and the pressure to conform under threat of disfellowshipping. They argue that France's scrutiny may finally expose the coercive underbelly of a group that hides behind the language of peace and love. And for these survivors, deregistration is not an attack on faith. It's an act of justice. France is not alone. Governments worldwide are beginning to confront high-control religious movements masquerading as benign faiths. In Norway, the state revoked Jehovah's Witnesses registration in 2022 over their shunning practices, citing violations of human rights. The European Court of Human Rights is currently reviewing the case, but Norway's move set a precedent. In Belgium, the organization faces ongoing legal challenges for discrimination and social exclusion. In Australia, a government commission exposed systemic cover-ups of child sexual abuse within the religion. And in the United States, civil lawsuits have mounted against the Watchtower for failing to report predators to law enforcement. France's actions thus fit a broader international pattern: a growing recognition that religious freedom cannot be a license for harm. And perhaps the greatest irony of the saga lies in the Jehovah's Witnesses' own teachings. The organization constantly instructs members to remain no part of the world, avoiding politics and governmental interference. Yet, when their own status is threatened, the Watchtower suddenly becomes one of the world's most politically active religious entities, mobilizing followers to lobby, write letters, and influence officials. This contradiction exposes the hypocrisy at the core of their theology. When governments enforce laws that restrict their control, the organization cries persecution. But when those same governments protect their assets and tax privileges, the Watchtower happily benefits from the worldly systems. The leaked French letter lays this hypocrisy bare. It proves that when push comes to shove, the neutral religion is more than willing to engage in organized political lobbying, as long as it serves the interests of its ruling body. Some may argue that France's attempt to deregister Jehovah's Witnesses is legally dubious and morally wrong, setting a dangerous precedent for religious freedom in Europe. But the leaked letter exposing the organization's orchestrated response is equally troubling, confirming the authoritarian control that critics like us have long alleged. France's move to reconsider Jehovah's Witness legal status represents a pivotal moment here, not just for the country, but for the world. It demonstrates that religious liberty and human rights can coexist, but not when one is used to suppress the other. By exposing this leaked letter, we see a rare glimpse behind the Washaw's polished facade. What emerges is not a persecuted minority, but a global corporation masquerading as a religion, using fear and conformity to preserve its power. France's challenge is not against belief, but against control, against the idea that any organization can dictate how individuals think, act, and even write to their own government. In the end, this confrontation is not just about France or Jehovah's Witnesses. It is about the broader tensions between religious liberty and accountability, between belief and behavior. The French Republic, born from revolution and reason, insists that freedom of religion cannot be a shield for control and coercion. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate test, whether a modern democracy can confront spiritual authoritarianism without becoming authoritarian itself.